Hi, I'm Hannah Wallace and welcome to Finextra TV's Thought Leadership series. In this episode, we're going to be looking at the number of consumers now interacting with their banks through online channels, how this has led to an increase in online fraud as well as mobile phishing attacks, the way in which banks are meeting some of these challenges and also implementing the new technologies and making operational improvements to improve user experience and reduce fraud. So to help us through the topic, and joining us on the call now is Gerhard Zehethofer from ForgeRock and Xavier Duadu from OneSpan. So gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us on the call.
Thank you very much.
Happy to be here.
No problem at all. So yes, there's no doubt one of the big trends we've seen this year is an acceleration in the number of consumers now interacting with their banks through online channels. So Gerhard, coming to you first, could you talk us through this and explain maybe why and how banks can make online banking processes faster, simpler, and more user-friendly? Let's start there.
Yes, Hannah, sure. Actually, we commissioned a research recently and we asked consumers in 5 countries around the world. But there are 2 key findings that I'd like to mention because they're relevant for this discussion. One is more than half the people polled will continue to use more online services even after the pandemic. So there's a lasting effect. And that has an impact, of course, on the online setup for any business, in particular also for banks. The second finding I find is even more important because it's about customer acquisition and retention. And more than 35% of the people asked, of all the people asked, not only those that use more services, they said they'll drop the app or the service if they have trouble accessing it or if they have a bad online experience. As far as the customer experience goes, it's important to build trust with the consumer and to recognize him through all the channels.
All right, that's interesting, Gerhard. Thanks for setting the scene for us. And now, Xavier, could you jump in and tell us your thoughts there?
Sure. We indeed see an acceleration on online channels. Banks have to offer easy to consume services anywhere, any device, anytime. The bottom line is bank needs to be open. Let me give you an example. You've got a new PC and you want to connect to your bank. You're going to have your credentials to do that, and you go online to your browser, you try to connect, and you are challenged by your bank to authentify whether this PC is yours. So they're going to send you through your mobile app, potentially, a PIN code that you're going to have to enter into your browser. So when you do that, you're then going to have access to your banking account.
Now imagine you go back to that same PC again during the day. You don't want to be challenged a second time. And that's what it's all about, risk-based authentication.
This new technology making user experience frictionless. And that's what we see more and more the consumer asking the banks. Now, this rising demand from the consumer, we feel the banks need to address 2 things at the same time. One is about modernizing their identity management, as well as at the same time, upgrade their authentications to make sure they take into account fraud and have risk capabilities in it. And the one that can have the capacity to do the 2 together are successful.
Well, as you say, online fraud has increased, with account takeover fraud up by 72% over last year and an increase of 37% of mobile phishing attacks. So can you tell us a bit about why this is and what banks can do about it? Xavier, let's start with you.
If you look at the statistic, people log in from twice a month to 30 times a month because we are more and more transacting online. It can be consumer, it can be merchant, it can be businesses. Every line of business pretty much is looking to transact more online. And it is not just about COVID-19. This is a trend we see now since a couple of years. Now, when you have to deal with more transactions, the challenge for banks is to have the capacity to analyze and monitor this bigger volume of transactions. There's 2 things they need to take into account when they do that. The first one is they're going to need to have a robust fraud solution that can be performing real time. And that real time needs to be able to be done in a millisecond in order to make sure they can take actions that will not frustrate the customers, as I mentioned earlier, in terms of the user experience. The second thing is, while you need to deploy a risk-based authentications, you also need to detect fraud that's not going to create more work for your fraud team. You don't want, because there is more risk, to have to add more people potentially to handle it. You know, banks are very cautious about their IT costs. So therefore, you need a solution that is going to take care of 99% of the time. It will be remediate automatically and making sure we take actions. And then maybe less 1% will be handled through manual auditing, let's say. So what I just explained is, in order to make that kind of solution, you need cutting edge technologies, IA, machine learning capabilities that power your risk engine and be able to deliver for prevention.
All right, go ahead. Could you come in there and tell us your views on things?
What you really want is the capability to understand the context and have contextual access. What does that mean? So the bank needs to understand who accesses the account, of course, but then also what does he want to do? Why does he do it? And also when and where. And if you can understand all these relationships and contexts of that transaction and compare it to the person's typical behavior, and when it falls within the typical behavior, of course, it can be as frictionless as it can be. But when it's goofy or when it's out of the normal, then you can introduce friction or lock out access altogether. Another capability to look for is if you want to just check the balance of your bank account, that can be a simple access. But if you want to make a significant transaction or deal with stocks, you want to be able to scale up and step up security. I think these are aspects the banks need to look for to do both, be customer-centric and customer-friendly, and prevent fraud and in an automated way as good as they can.
Sure, that's interesting. And of course, speed to market is very important as well. So how can banks make changes that are fast and adaptable to their needs without this long implementation process and time? Go ahead, could you jump in there?
You would want to look for a comprehensive platform and for pre-integrated solutions. There is a network of technology partners that are pre-integrated that saves time to market. The other aspect is not just to implement it once, it's also to be able to adopt it to the ever-changing and growing requirements in the market. And what you would like to have there is a platform that allows you to build and modify the workflow as the demands change. And if you can do that with a graphical or a visual workflow, and having all the modern technology of AI behind it, so you have this adaptive capability with minimum effort, that's really what you look for.
All right, that's really interesting. Xavier, do you have any closing remarks there?
The banks are looking for what are the vendors' ecosystem. And the main reason is because they want to keep their options open. They want to be able to add more capabilities and always look at how do I reduce complexity. And really, ForgeRock and OneSpan are an alliance that is a living proof of that concept. So instead of building a locking kind of strategy with our platform, we keep it open. And we want to make sure that not only our two technology work together, but we've got an ecosystem of partners that will be able to enrich that environment for the banks. And when you do this, effectively, you're helping banks to innovate at a fast pace because you leave the options, the capabilities always open for more innovation. That's what we drive with these alliances with ForgeRock.
Brilliant. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much. You've cleared up a lot of things there, and it sounds like a really strong partnership. So we'll leave it there today, but thank you so much for calling in and sharing your insights. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.